What's in a word? Specifically, these words: minority, black, disability, oppression, stereotype, prejudice, and women.
Well, these are among scores of seemingly innocuous words that have been scrubbed from the government lexicon. That's right, the government is at war with these words. According to the New York Times, reams of past memos have been scrubbed of words that reflect a moment that was and a moment that is. Here's an example or two. Notice the words that were deleted here. The last year has brought significant challenges to the Head Start workforce. All staff have been impacted by COVID-19. As such, OHS is committed to a culture of wellness that includes holistic support for the entire Head Start workforce. There was also this. The negotiations team represents the United States in negotiations under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. Of course, as well as all that, DEI is the equivalent of a curse word. Let's watch.
I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based.
The federal government has whitewashed the terms being used. What's more, entire websites have vanished, including those covering public health data and some with climate-related information. While there are groups trying to archive that data and those websites, some will obviously fall through the cracks. And last but not least is USAID.
Per a report in Politico, remaining staff were ordered on Tuesday to destroy documents. The document purge raised questions about whether any of the materials should be archived or otherwise retained for legal and historical reasons. Anna Kelly, a spokesperson for the White House, downplayed concerns in a social media post late Tuesday. Quote, "This was sent to roughly 36 employees. The documents involved were old, mostly courtesy content, and the originals still exist on classified computer systems. More fake news hysteria."
So I'm assuming you think it is fake news hysteria, broadly speaking, Amber?
I just don't see what the big deal is, I guess.
So I think I think I might not disagree with you quite as emphatically as you think, but tell me what you think and then we'll go from there.
It just seems pretty standard that new administrations remove materials from past administrations that is not in keeping with how they want to run the government. Biden did this several times during his administration. One of the first things he did when he entered office was to scrub the 1776 report that a Trump commission had created to basically counter the 1619 project. He got rid of documents, official documents relating to Afghan security training and weapons funding from 2001 up to the time that he took office. So this is not out of the norm, and I think the idea that they're trying to turn this into a massive scandal when we're just talking about a website seems a bit bizarre to me.
So here's where I will offend everyone by not really fully endorsing that and not really fully disagreeing with it either. This, I think, is a bit more nuanced than people are portraying it as. There's, of course, a rather limited market for nuance at the moment. But
we like it on this show.
We do like it on this show. And to that point, here's where I agree with you. There is, I think, a danger in throwing all of this into one bucket and saying it is deleting information, deleting important data. One of the pieces that I was looking at that was part of this story was actually from NPR, and they noted that as they termed this purging websites to do with LGBTQ interests. And one of the pages they alluded to was an HHS page that in the Biden era said that HHS stands with transgender and gender non-conforming youth in unequivocally stating that gender-affirming care for minors improves their physical and mental health. Whether I like it or not, the Trump administration does not believe that. The Trump-era HHS obviously does not stand unequivocally behind that, and that's okay to change. Where I differ, I think, from you or from the people who say, well, it's no big deal, is not in the construction of policy, but the destruction of existing research or data, which does seem weirder. there's, for example, apparently a digital tool that showed unequal or disproportionate areas affected by pollution that has disappeared. There was a January the 6th searchable database maintained by the Department of Justice that has disappeared. There was an IRS form where private schools had to certify that they hadn't engaged in racial discrimination that has disappeared. Those things to me seem not about a new administration changing policy and enunciating its policy, but in removing or hiding or concealing knowledge, concealing facts.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, what's happened in some of these cases is that the Doge employees were basically given keywords to search of things to remove, and they made mistakes along the way. One of the examples of this was at the Enola Gay case, where they had removed a page involving that individual because it had the word gay in it, and so they were just basically taking everything down. And a lot of the websites have since been restored because they realized that they were caught up in errors of people not being judicious enough with what actually they were removing. And there's going to be mistakes made in these large efforts to basically reshape the way that the federal government works. We've seen that with some of the employees who have been fired and then rehired related to the bird flu. I think we talked about that a few weeks ago. And I'm willing to give some latitude to the administration because I think that the efforts that they're undertaking are incredibly massive, where an error here or there on a web page being removed that shouldn't have been removed doesn't seem like, again, a major scandal to me as long as it's rectified.
So here's what I would say, I think, in counter to that to some extent. In relation to both Doge writ large and to this issue in particular, I think the onus is on the government, whoever happens to be in power at that time, to be judicious and to be well-reasoned and to be careful. And one of the difficulties, I think, with the current administration is it is prone to these very blanket assertions. And not only in relation to the Enola Gay matter, which was, I think, literally to do with the word gay. There was another separate thing where the Air Force briefly removed or thought it had to remove a lesson or a part of a lesson about the Tuskegee Airmen. And then a day or two later, it was decided that, in fact, they didn't have to do that. But that, to me, gets to this thing where we can't acknowledge, the argument being made by the Trump administration is a very sweeping pushback against anything that acknowledges past racial inequity. And even the Trump administration or the people who enact those laws eventually come to the conclusion that, okay, well, actually, we don't really want to suppress mention of the Tuskegee Airmen. And so that sort of stuff gets kind of confused.
I'm also curious about how many of these stories are the result of malicious compliance. Are there staffers who are taking these Doge directives and instead of complying with the spirit of the directive, intentionally taking away things that could technically be classified under removing references to race, but doing it in a way that intentionally makes the administration look like they are using a chainsaw instead of a scalpel? And
Mr. Musk's favorite weapon, however, is the chainsaw.
That's right. So I would be curious to know if some of these employees are in fact engaging in malicious compliance and saying, well, look, you gave us this order, this is what it's going to do, it's going to get rid of Enola Gay and the Tuskegee Airmen. We warned you, and sort of putting them on defense in that way. And then how many are cases of people not paying attention and going too far?
Sure, or the rules going too far. Well, in any event, we'll move on to whether NPR tried to put one of its hosts back in the so-called closet. That's coming up next on Rising.